Well, welcome everybody to the June online program of the Sunshine Coast Health Center here in beautiful Powell River, BC. Anyway, this month I thought we'd take a look at, well, what do you do if you don't believe in a higher power? And the reason I was thinking about this is I just finished reading Dr. Gabor Mate's new book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And Mate, like so many people in this field, talks about this emptiness inside the addict, this feeling of, at one point he calls it a void. There's something inside the addict that needs filling. And so in recovery he mentions this idea of, well, the addict needs some kind of spirituality, some kind of higher power that he can connect with that'll fill up the void for him. Anyway, this idea of filling the void with a higher power is kind of common. As you all know, in the 12-step program, they make a really huge point about this. And they even say at one point in the big book that no human power could help us, that we had to connect with this benevolent force that pervades the universe. And by connecting with this force, then we could get good recovery and fill up this void and meaninglessness. So this is a fairly common thing, and even in psychology, we're talking a lot now about spirituality. And there's a very famous book published by the American Psychological Association and put together by a fellow by the name of William Miller down in New Mexico, where he talks about bringing spirituality into the treatment of addictions. So this is all interesting and good, but I'm thinking there's probably a lot of you out here who don't believe in this benevolent higher power. That if you do believe in a higher power, then maybe it's not a very nice higher power. Or in some cases, maybe you just don't believe in it at all. And then what do? Are you now stuck? Are you doomed to relapse or a dry drunk because you don't believe in connecting with this higher power? And that's what this month's online program is going to be about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 4 ideas from very good thinkers. I'm thinking the ideas, I think I'll be mentioning Friedrich Nietzsche, the great philosopher, and maybe Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the great writers of the 20th century. And because it's me, I got to mention Eugene O'Neill. But these 3 men, just as one example, these 3 men they believed in a higher power, but this power could care less about you as a human being. The force that pervades the universe. Really, whether you lived or died, or whether you had 3 kids, I mean, this force just doesn't care. And they truly believed this. They didn't believe in any sort of benevolent force that was out there. And these 3 thinkers gave us lots of works and said, and these works are all about how do I live a meaningful life, given the fact that this force that governs the universe really could care less about me. And they came up with all sorts of good answers. So I thought for June, each week we'll pick out one of these answers these great thinkers gave us. Maybe it'll give you a roadmap that you can use on the way to your recovery. At any rate, oh, and by the way, too, a lot of the people say, in recovery will say, well, if you don't believe in this benevolent higher power, then you should fake it till you make it. That's a fairly common comment, for example, in the 12-step program. But these researchers at the University of New Mexico, which is a very famous addiction department there, have actually studied this idea of fake it till you make it in depth. And Scott Tonigan, sort of William Miller's right-hand guy down in New Mexico, was up in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and he actually gave a talk, and one of the things he was mentioning that according to research, this concept of fake it till you make it really doesn't work all that well. At least not in real, practical, daily life. So, anyway, just a little bit of research information for you. So anyway, we'll begin this program for our week 1 with an idea from Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher. And one of his big points was that he said, look, if you want to live a meaningful life, you have to like be heroic and follow your beliefs and your values. And one thing he made a huge point about is don't be a sheep, don't be a follower. Okay? And this idea of don't be a sheep is actually very useful for recovering addicts. And in fact, Friedrich Nietzsche actually wrote about drunkenness. So he had some idea of what being drunk was all about. And this idea of don't be a sheep means you have to start being true to yourself and finding some courage inside of you. The basic idea behind it was he never believed in Christianity or anything like that. And this was like 100 years ago, actually a little more than 100 years ago. So he didn't believe that the prevailing ideas of Christianity or religion were that good in Germany. So he didn't have much use for them. And so he was, I guess, what we would call an atheist. And he said, still, does this mean that I can't live a meaningful life? And he said, no, that doesn't mean at all. So where I'm going to get my meaning is out of like being myself and being true to myself. And he would look at the world and he would say, look at the world is filled with suffering. People will cause me suffering, but still my job is to be myself and to honor my values and my beliefs and go on to live a good life. And Nietzsche said, in that is the key. So in this belief that I'm going to follow my own way, what he in fact called the Superman, and all these things that we admire about, for example, Superman, his determination, his integrity, and all this. This was for Friedrich Nietzsche pretty fundamental to life, because there was nothing else to base meaning on. Because if God didn't exist, then what do you base your life on, right? How do you know you're living an ethical life? How do you know you're living a worthwhile life? So without the idea of God or religion or even spirituality, that there's some great benevolent force in the world, then how do you as a human being live this? So one of his answers, although it's pretty complex stuff, but one of his answers was follow your beliefs, your values, and stick to them regardless of the pain you suffer or anything else. In fact, even Nietzsche made this big comment. He even said that the heroic man he'll even ask for pain as long as he can see a reason for it, as long as it's part of his struggle to allow him to be himself, to follow his dreams. Anyways, that's an interesting little comment. This idea of don't be a sheep, don't give up yourself just to follow the herd. And even in psychology, I think I told you a few weeks back, a very famous psychologist by the name of Rollo May, and he actually made the comment that the reason most people in the 20th century suffered so horribly is that they were more than happy to give up themselves in order to join the herd. And he was quite convinced that this is one of the major reasons why people suffered horribly. So again, same idea. To be true to yourself, true to your values, and by doing that and by struggling through that, this is where that void, that emptiness would get fulfilled. Anyway, it's something to think about. And as always, we have our online program. If you want to fill it in and send it out, fill it out and send it in to us, that's great. And we'll see you next week.